A Roman soldier drives a nail through human flesh, while a Persian executioner drowns a man in honey and insects. Crucifixion versus Scaphism, the barbaric truth. Welcome to Historical Verses, the channel that puts history on trial. Tonight, we're comparing documented industrial murder against what might be history's most successful horror story. Because while archaeologists have found crucifixion nails still lodged in victims' bones, our entire knowledge of Scaphism comes from one Greek source that also wrote about dog-headed people and rivers of liquid gold. Here's the stakes. We're about to score human suffering like it's a performance review. One of these methods killed tens of thousands and had its own paperwork. The other allegedly kept one man alive for 17 days, while insects ate him from the inside out, if it ever happened at all. Our verdict relies on 5 weighted criteria that measure different flavors of barbarism. First, we examine the evidence, then case versus case. Finally, the scoreboard decides. You walk through Rome 71 BCE. The Appian Way stretches ahead, lined with 6,000 crosses bearing Spartacus's followers. The smell hits first, decay mixed with the metallic tang of blood. This wasn't unusual. This was infrastructure. The Romans turned crucifixion into a science. They had regulations about who could be crucified. Slaves, yes. Citizens, no, unless you really annoyed the emperor. Meanwhile, Persian Scaphism exists as a single account from Plutarch, writing 5 centuries after it supposedly happened, quoting Ctesias, who was basically the ancient world's least reliable narrator. It reads like someone asked, "How can we weaponize dessert?" But here's what should terrify you. One of these punishments was so common that Romans had a casual phrase for it, "go to the cross," their version of "go to hell." The other involved trapping someone between 2 boats and letting nature's cleanup crew handle the rest. This isn't just about comparing pain. We're examining how civilizations institutionalize their worst impulses, how they transform human agony into either law or legend. By the end, you'll understand why one method has archaeological evidence while the other might just be the world's oldest creepypasta. You'll see why bureaucratic evil beats creative evil every time. And you'll learn which form of barbarism actually wins when you put history on trial. You're a clerk in Rome, 73 BCE, filing paperwork for tomorrow's executions. Form 23B, request for additional nails. This is the most disturbing part. Crucifixion had forms. Some bureaucrat calculated the optimal nail angle for maximum suffering per denarius spent. This wasn't rage or madness. This was a Tuesday afternoon administrative decision. Exhibit: Crucifixion Productivity Reports. The Romans created job titles for this. Executioner, Level 3, Specialization, Nerve Cluster Targeting. Someone got promoted for suggesting square nails instead of round ones, better median nerve damage, you see. They probably had quarterly performance reviews. "Marcus, your scourging numbers are down. We need to talk about your commitment to preliminary torture." Here's the strongest proof of Rome's barbarity. They crucified 500 Jews per day during the siege of Jerusalem. 500 per day. That's a person every 3 minutes for 12 hours straight. The soldiers got so bored they started posing victims in creative positions, upside down, sideways, positions I can't describe without getting age-restricted. They turned human suffering into artistic expression. During Spartacus's revolt, they lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crosses. That's one every 60 feet for over 100 miles. Imagine driving from Los Angeles to San Diego, seeing nothing but dying people the entire way. Your Roman GPS would say, in 400 feet, turn right at the screaming. Exhibit 6,000 in one day. Let's talk mechanics, because the Romans certainly did. First came scourging with a flagrum, a whip embedded with metal balls and bone fragments. Someone looked at a regular whip and thought, this could hurt more. The goal wasn't death. Death was inefficient. The goal was bringing you exactly to the edge, leaving just enough blood inside to keep you conscious for the main event. You carry a 100-pound crossbeam through the city while naked. Every step scrapes raw wood against wounds. Every stumble earns a kick from guards treating this like their morning commute. Fun fact, they usually didn't waste wood on full crosses. The executioner positions your wrists, not your palms. Those would tear. They drive nails between your radius and ulnar bones, severing your median nerve. Every microscopic movement sends lightning through your arms. The Romans discovered this by accident and thought feature, not bug. Death takes anywhere from 6 hours to 4 days. You hang there, every breath a conscious decision to push up on nailed feet. Your shoulders dislocate within the first hour. Insects feed on your wounds while you watch. Birds peck at you before you die. Now here's the Steelman argument. Crucifixion's horror was precisely its point, a calculated deterrent that kept the empire stable. Rome lasted 1,000 years after all. Here's why that's nonsense. Crucifixion didn't prevent revolts, it caused them. The Jewish War, partially triggered by excessive crucifixions. Christianity's spread, accelerated by martyrdom. The empire's eventual collapse, they hastened by the very brutalities supposed to preserve it. The archaeological evidence makes it worse. We've found exactly 4 confirmed crucifixion victims out of tens of thousands. Why? Romans denied burial to crucifixion victims. Your body stayed up until it liquefied or animals scattered your bones. They erased you from existence twice. The nail found in Yohanan's ankle, it's bent because it hit a knot. They buried him with it still embedded because they couldn't pull it out. His preservation was a carpentry error. Exhibit: the bent nail of Yohanan. This wasn't barbarism, this was barbarity with spreadsheets, quality control for agony, performance metrics for death. Speaking of creative agony, the Persians allegedly invented something that made crucifixion look humane. Something so grotesque that historians still argue whether it was real or the world's first creepypasta. You're Mithridates, a Persian soldier in 401 BCE. You just killed Cyrus the Younger in battle. Career-defining moment. Unfortunately, King Artaxerxes already claimed that kill. Your reward for inconvenient honesty? You're about to become the star of history's least believable torture story. Let's address the elephant, or should I say, boat, in the room. Our entire knowledge of Scaphism comes from one source, Plutarch, writing 500 years later, quoting Ctesias, who also wrote about people with feet so large they use them as umbrellas. But let's pretend it's real. Oh boy, let's pretend. Here's the method that reads like someone asked, how can we weaponize dessert? They force-feed you milk and honey until you develop violent diarrhea. They smear more honey on your exposed face and limbs. Then they trap you between two boats, hence scaphism from the Greek for boat, leaving only your head, hands, and feet exposed. Finally, they float you on a stagnant pond under the Persian sun. The honey attracts insects, the insects lay eggs, the eggs hatch. Do I need to continue? According to Plutarch, Mithridates survived 17 days like this. 17 days. Exhibit: Day 17, Ecosystem. But here's the strongest point about Scaphism's barbarity. You're conscious the entire time. Unlike crucifixion, where shock eventually numbs you, Scaphism keeps you alert through forced nutrition. You feel every insect. You smell your own decay. You know exactly what's happening as worms, quoting Plutarch here, swarmed out from the inside of him. The honey-milk mixture ensures you stay hydrated and nourished just enough for maximum awareness. Your body becomes a prison you can't escape. By day 3, you're not just dying, you're an ecosystem. By day 10, you're begging for crucifixion. By day 17, you've transcended horror into something there's no word for. You know what the Persians actually used for execution? Impalement. Boring, standard impalement. Their own records at Behistun show this. No boats, no honey, just your classic stick-through torso everybody was doing back then. Now for the steel man. Ctesias lived at the Persian court as Artaxerxes II's personal physician. If anyone would know about royal executions, it would be him. Plus, the symbolic logic fits Persian ideology, using pure substances like milk and honey to reveal inner corruption. It's philosophically consistent with Zoroastrian concepts. Here's why that's probably nonsense. Exhibit: Ctesias's Canadian girlfriend. First, Ctesias is the ancient equivalent of that friend who swears they dated a model, but she goes to a different school. His other works include Indian people with backwards feet and mountains of gold guarded by griffins. Even ancient historians called him out for making stuff up. Second, no Persian source mentions Scaphism. 0. The Persians kept extensive records. They carved their greatest punishment hits into mountainsides. You'd think that time we killed a guy with boats and honey would make the highlight reel. Third, the biology doesn't work. 17 days of exposure and septic shock. Modern medical analysis says you'd be dead from toxemia within 72 hours, maybe a week if exceptionally unlucky. Quick reality check. We're debating whether being eaten alive by insects is worse than being nailed to wood. This is what passes for academic discourse. Fourth, this story perfectly fits Greek propaganda patterns. The Greeks consistently portrayed Persians as soft, luxurious, and weirdly creative with cruelty. This tale combines all three: luxury items turned deadly, overcomplicated execution, and decay that plays into Greek fears about Eastern decadence. Exhibit: ancient fan fiction. The account uses energia, vivid description designed to make you feel like an eyewitness. It's the ancient equivalent of found footage horror. Plutarch wanted readers to feel that visceral disgust, to think, thank Zeus, we're not like those barbarians. Here's the real twist. If Scaphism never existed, that might make it worse. Someone invented this story specifically to demonize an entire civilization. They created a torture method so memorable, so specifically horrible, that we're still discussing it 2,000 years later. That's weaponized fiction. Propaganda so effective that it might as well be real. So we have tens of thousands of confirmed crucifixion victims versus one possibly fictional boat honey victim. Roman legal codes versus Persian fairy tales. Archaeological evidence versus ancient creepypasta.
Time to see which method wins our barbarity contest. The cases have been made, the evidence is in. It's time for the final showdown. Let's be clear about what we're doing here. We're applying mathematical scoring to human suffering, which is exactly as absurd as it sounds. But sometimes absurdity reveals truth. So, let's calculate which method of killing people was objectively worse, as if that's a normal Tuesday activity. On procedural cruelty, weighted at 25%. This measures intentional pain beyond just killing someone. Roman crucifixion scores 8 out of 10. Persian scaphism scores 10 out of 10. The Romans had cruelty by checklist. Pre-show scourging, forced march with crossbeam, calculated nerve-clustered targeting. Someone probably got promoted for optimizing nail angles. Scaphism, allegedly, turned your digestive system into a torture device, while insects became your executioners. They transformed you into living compost while keeping you conscious for the entire experience. On duration of suffering, weighted at 20%. Crucifixion scores 6 out of 10. Scaphism scores 10 out of 10. Most crucifixion victims died within 1 to 3 days. Terrible, but there was at least an endpoint visible. Scaphism's alleged 17 days is longer than most vacations. That's binge-watching 3 Netflix series while being slowly consumed by insects. On public spectacle, weighted at 15%. Crucifixion scores 10 out of 10. Scaphism scores 7 out of 10. Crucifixion was performance art with unwilling performers. They lined major roads with crosses. Now, kids, get in the cart, we're going to see the criminals on the way to Grandma's. Your death was everyone else's warning. Scaphism, trapped in boats on a pond, that's limited seating. More like an exclusive art house showing of horror. Here comes the game changer. On scale and frequency, weighted at 25%. Crucifixion scores 10 out of 10. Scaphism scores 1 out of 10. Tens of thousands confirmed dead via crucifixion. 6,000 after Spartacus, 500 per day at Jerusalem. This was the McDonald's of execution methods. Billions served, except the opposite. Scaphism has 1 victim. Maybe. Possibly 0 if it's fiction. That's like comparing Amazon to a farmer's market vendor who might not exist. On legal codification, weighted at 15%. Crucifixion scores 9 out of 10. Scaphism scores 2 out of 10. Crucifixion was in the law books with sentencing guidelines. Your Honor, my client requests crucifixion with nails, not ropes, as specified in subsection C. They probably had crucifixion attorneys. Scaphism was allegedly one king having a particularly creative bad day. No legal framework, no precedent, just artisexes saying, you know what would really send a message? Let's total this up. Roman crucifixion 8.55, Persian scaphism 6.1. By our declared criteria, Roman crucifixion takes it. But wait! Remember that twist about historical evidence? Even if scaphism had won on points, we promised that stronger documentation would break any tie. Crucifixion has archaeological evidence, thousands of witnesses, and legal documentation. Scaphism has one Greek guy quoting another Greek guy who wrote about dog-headed people. The real barbarity might be that we're comparing industrial-scale torture against what amounts to ancient fan fiction. One civilization killed thousands in the most painful way possible and kept receipts. Another civilization had such a terrifying reputation that enemies possibly invented impossible torture stories about them. Which is more barbaric? The empire that actually crucified tens of thousands, or the storytellers who invented something so memorably horrific we are still debating its existence?
The verdict is in. Roman crucifixion wins our barbarity contest 8.55 to 6.1. We didn't even need the tiebreaker. The scoreboard alone settled it. But that number doesn't capture the real horror. Here's what actually makes crucifixion more barbaric. It was boring. It was routine. It was so normal that Roman children grew up thinking crosses along highways were just part of the landscape, like billboards for death. "Daddy, why is that man screaming?" "Don't stare, sweetie. That's just infrastructure." Scaphism, even if fictional, reveals something equally disturbing. Someone invented a torture method so memorably awful that people still debate it 2 millennia later. We're literally discussing their creative writing exercise right now. But here's the darkest truth. The Romans crucified people with the same emotional investment you'd have filing tax returns. They had crucifixion productivity metrics. Middle managers complained about nail costs affecting quarterly budgets. They transformed the worst thing you can do to a human body into paperwork. Meanwhile, the Greeks wrote horror stories about their enemies so effective we still believe them. They turned the Persians into horror movie villains using nothing but words and honey. That's propaganda powerful enough to outlive both empires. You want to know what's truly barbaric? It's not the creativity of torture or even the duration. It's normalization. It's when killing people becomes so routine you develop best practices. It's when your civilization's deterrent is, "We'll turn your death into a bureaucratic process." The Persians, if they used Scaphism at all, at least made it special. One guy, one boat, one really bad career decision. The Romans industrialized agony. They had crucifixion quality control. Someone's actual job was director of nail placement optimization. Bureaucratic evil beats creative evil because it never gets tired. A system that turns torture into standard operating procedure is more barbaric than any individual act of creative cruelty. Systems survive. They replicate. They spread. One horrible king dies, but horrible paperwork is forever. The Romans didn't just kill people. They created a template for state terror that echoes through history. Every regime that's turned murder into administrative routine learned from Rome's example. They showed the world you don't need creative cruelty when you have forms to fill out. Maybe that's why we're so fascinated by Scaphism, even if it's fake. It's comprehensively horrible. One victim, one method, one story. But tens of thousands of crucifixions? That number becomes abstract. Stalin supposedly said, "One death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic." The Romans proved it first. The verdict is in. But history is never that simple. Who gets your vote? Cast your judgment in the comments below. Speaking of horrible deaths that became weirdly normalized, tap the video on screen to watch our last video on Charles II of Spain versus King Tut to see who was more inbred. Spoiler, when your family tree is a straight line, everybody loses. Next time on Historical Versus, Anne Boleyn versus Marie Antoinette. Which royal execution shocked the world more? Subscribe to find out. Thanks for watching Historical Versus.